Great, thanks, Sarah. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining me today. First, the good news. We got spring breaking out back home in Wisconsin, which is buoying spirits. Certainly, I feel it. I hope it's just not a teaser because March can still be a bear in the upper Midwest. But the other good news is in a few short hours, we will be passing the next COVID relief package out of the House of Representatives. And it is needed. We have to meet the urgency of the moment. While we see a light at the end of the tunnel, now that people are starting to get inoculated, now that we're ramping up production of the doses and getting it back home, we don't know how long that tunnel is yet. And we still have a very deadly virus in our midst. This COVID package, because of the urgency and the speed, certainly isn't a perfect response to everything that we must address, but it's a direct response to what we've been hearing from people back home in Wisconsin. The challenges they're facing, the additional assistance that they need, whether it's our frontline healthcare providers who have been incredible over the last year and also exhausted. And now they're playing an instrumental role in the inoculation process. Our schools who are trying desperately to get our kids back in the classroom in a safe manner and the increased costs that they're incurring to do such a thing. Our small businesses and family farmers who are still going through a lot of struggles, and families and individuals having a hard time making their monthly payments, whether it's for heat, whether it's rent, whether it's for food. The $1,400 rebate checks, I think, will go a long ways to buy some additional time until we can get more shots in the arm, protecting people, and then fully opening up the economy so it's firing on all cylinders again. And to give you a couple of examples of feedback I've heard recently back home, just a couple of days ago, I did a virtual event with some students at Western Technical College, both female, who told me that the prior COVID relief programs that they were able to access was a lifesaver for them to maintain the training and the education programs that they're currently enrolled in TC, or they would have been forced to have to drop out with some student debt following them. I just did a virtual telephone town hall with people throughout Western Wisconsin last night. I heard from a gentleman who was in his early 50s that just had an organ transplant and therefore very vulnerable to this coronavirus. And he was desperate in knowing when he would get in the queue and get those doses in order to protect him at this high state of vulnerability. And I did a virtual meeting with all of our healthcare providers and public health directors this week to get an update on how the vaccination is going. What I heard from them is they need doses, doses, doses. The demand far exceeds the supply. This COVID relief package will go a long ways with additional resources to ramp up the production of the doses, get those back down to the state and local level with the partners and the distribution centers that have been set up and getting them to people as soon as possible. So I feel it's necessary. I anticipate it passing out of the House today. The Senate hopes to take it up next week. And time is of the essence because many of these programs are due to expire starting March 14th, including the expiration of the unemployment benefits, which would affect millions of Americans right now. So I'm hoping that we can still get some bipartisan support for it, but I do believe it's the right response at the right time. And then as we move forward, Congress needs to stay nimble and responsive to the facts on the ground back home in case further adjustments or further assistance is needed. Hopefully it won't come to that later on, but again, it's hard to predict. But I'm going to be supporting this, and I think it's the right thing to do. Happy to take any questions.
Hey, Senator, I'm already promoting you again. Congressman Kind, Brian Winnikins from WRDN. I guess a couple of questions. One, there are many Republicans that say some of the checks should be more targeted, and why wasn't really that done? Because there are many people that are just like, nah, I don't need it. I'm just putting into the savings or whatever. And how are we going to pay for all of this?
Yeah, Brian, I agree that we could have done a better job of means testing this. This does phase out though for higher earning individuals. That's in it. But to do that would have slowed down what Treasury is capable of turning around. They would have had to make a lot of adjustments. It would have probably taken more weeks, if not months, to get those rebate checks out the door, rather than going with the existing program as it is right now. That means once we pass the bill, within a matter of days, those rebate checks will be getting out. So it was a trade-off between changing the program to tighten it up and means test it, and then and as a consequence, delaying those checks getting out the door at the maximum moment of need right now. So, but if I had my magic wand, I would have done that. I would have done more means testing of the rebate checks.
And I guess for being able to pay for this down the road, that there's a lot of concern that we're going to, as time goes on here, there's going to be a lot of inflation, higher interest rates. Yeah, the Fed has said they're not going to do that yet, but things can change on a dime.
Yeah, again, I've been one of the most fiscally responsible members of Congress. I'm a strong adherent in pay-as-you-go rules, but by not doing this means delaying the economic recovery. And the best thing we can do to get our fiscal house in order everywhere at the federal, state, local level is a growing, robust, full employment economy. And this COVID package is going to help us get to that spot much sooner, which means more revenues ultimately from a growing economy. That will help the fiscal picture. But to your point, Congress right now should be working on a long-term fiscal plan for our nation, given the incredible amount of debt that's been racked up in recent years, including, I might add, a $2.4 trillion tax cut that President Trump signed into law without any of it being paid for, and 83% of that benefit going to the wealthiest 1% and to multinational corporations. That too is compounding our debt situation today. Thanks, Brian. Good to hear from you.
Representative,
Go ahead.
go ahead, Rob. Okay. This is Chuck from Channel 8. We're doing stories on the PFAS on French Island, and you live on French Island. Is there anything that the federal government can do at this point, or are you still working on that? And how concerned are you about the situation there?
Yeah, it is a serious situation. Obviously, we're talking about my neighbors. Now, we aren't directly affected where Tony and I have our home on the island, but because we're not downstream from the airport. But we have been in touch with local officials. We are scrubbing the various programs at the federal level to see if there's something that might fit given this situation. And we're monitoring it, obviously, very closely. And I think there is a role for the federal government to play here because of the mandate for airports to be using this type of retardant and foam. And that's the conversation that I'm having with various federal officials right now.
Is this an overall a symptom really for the whole nation? Is that the water supply, wherever you are, has something threatening it?
Yeah, and that's why I've been one of the strongest advocates for a strong conservation title of the Farm Bill. A lot of the groundwater contamination is runoff, and part of that is due to agricultural practices. And there are voluntary incentive-based programs that exist for better stewardship of that, for phosphorus, nitrate flows into the water system, into our rivers and streams, but also our groundwater. We have a major problem with that throughout Wisconsin. And it's going to require some very strong partnerships at the federal, state, local level, and working with the community to come up with solutions. It's fundamental. If you don't have good quality, safe water supply, very tough to grow a sustainable community. It's something that should be nonpartisan, and there has to be some answers to it.
Representative Kind, Roger Staffroni, WXW News 19. Just what is the temperature right now in Washington as far as post-insurrection? And is there a chance of civility coming back? Are people working together better, or are we kind of falling back into the same old bipartisan situations?
Well, Roger, first of all, we need a deep, thorough review of what took place and why, where the breakdowns occurred when it came to the security of our nation. I still get up first thing in the morning and run the mall, and it is a capital under siege. I've been to green zones before in Baghdad, Kabul, and it feels like that with the razor wire, the fences, the barricades. We've got more National Guard troops on the ground here in Washington, D.C. than we do in Iraq and Afghanistan. It shouldn't be this way. And so we need to find answers to why this broke down so terribly on January 6th, so we can better secure our capital so that visitors can come and knock on our doors and visit the way they did in the past. So that's fundamental. And I know we're trying to step up a commission right now to do that, and hopefully we'll be able to proceed. But we still have a problem with many of our colleagues in Congress who just hours after the insurrection 140 of them voted to overturn the election results. So there's a problem with an alternative reality that's been created and a big lie that is still out there, that this election wasn't legitimate, it was stolen, it was fraught with fraud, all of which lacked any basis in fact or evidence. And that's why 60 courts throughout these lawsuits, it's exactly where they should have been heard, and they dismissed it. Most of them with great criticism for the filing of those challenges because of the lack of evidence. And until we can move on from that, it's hard to find common ground with your colleagues who are fighting the peaceful transfer of power in our country. Good. Anyone else?
Congressman Kind, this is Hope with WPR. I just wanted to get your take on the fact that the $15 minimum wage appears to not likely to be a part of this next package.
You know, it was suspected because of the Senate budget rules. It would be difficult to keep it in. But listen, I've been clear that I think we're long overdue to increase that federal minimum wage, mainly because our state legislature in Wisconsin has refused to take any action. Hope $7.25 an hour is an embarrassment for Wisconsinites, those working at jobs below the poverty level, because the minimum wage is at $7.25. 3/4 of the states have increased that minimum wage already, including all our neighbors. And there has not been an adverse impact economically or for job growth in our neighboring states. So if the state legislature in Wisconsin would have done their job too, there would be less pressure in Washington to set a federal standard. And quite frankly, I prefer a regional approach because the minimum wage requirements in San Francisco or New York and the cost of living there is much different than it is in Western Wisconsin, what our small businesses have to contend with. So that would be a better approach regionally, indexed to inflation to take it out of the political arena. But unfortunately, we're going to have to do more work in Washington to figure out another path forward with that.
Representative Kind, Roger, again, real quick, a follow-up on debt. As far as a student loan debt, there seems to be some different opinions within the Democratic Party. Yourself not for the $50,000 forgiveness. Is there some availability of compromise there? There is a lot of debt that varies, and the cost of college going up. Your thoughts on any chance of any sort of forgiveness?
Yeah, you know, I've reached out to the Biden administration about what they have in mind, but I think, first of all, 50,000 disproportionately benefits more wealthy individuals and wealthy families. That's a tough sell, especially for those who incurred debt, worked hard, paid it off, and then suddenly those coming behind get debt relief and they didn't. It's a fairness argument that's legitimate. What are we going to tell the next generation of students coming up who incurred debt for their higher education? Are we just going to forgive that too? So there are a lot of complexities to this that I don't think has been well thought out. But one thing we need to be sensitive about is a lot of students who have less than 10,000 in debt are currently in default because of the job market and COVID. And I think there can be some relief given to them in light of the coronavirus environment that we are in that could go a long ways to help them out. Otherwise, they're just going to be in default. That's going to be on their record. It will be a blemish on their credit as they move forward and make it a lot harder for them to recover from it. And that's the type of conversation I'm engaging the Biden administration with right now. And then finally, Roger, we have a higher ed bill that's coming up for reauthorization. I want to see more effort to devote more resources for the need-based financial aid programs, the Pell Grant that doesn't have to be repaid, the work study that I benefited from as a student that doesn't, you earn money while you're going to school, so that there's less of an emphasis or a need on student indebtedness. 1.7 trillion in student debt is a ticking time bomb in our country, and we have to address it. And this higher ed bill is a great vehicle to do that.
This is Chuck Oatsman in WKBT again. Is anybody in Washington working on a plan on how we're going to move forward, assuming this virus never really goes away? Because we can't just keep doing emergency handouts, as it were. We eventually have to figure out how to deal with this virus long term.
Yeah, you know, I'm more optimistic that we can defeat this virus and develop herd immunity, but we all need to be in. And I know there's some vaccine hesitancy out there. That's becoming less, which is good, because we do need full participation to cut this virus off so it doesn't have a chance to spread, and more importantly, to mutate into more potent strains, as we're seeing right now landing on our shores. And as soon as we can get the production lines up and enough doses to meet the demand, I think we can get there. In fact, we just got a briefing yesterday that predicts we're probably going to have an oversupply of doses later on this summer, which would be a great situation to be in. And then we need to follow the science. I mean, if these companies need to make some adjustments to the vaccine to meet the newer strains that are developed, I'm confident they can do that. But this might require a booster shot every year, like the flu shot that most people get. And I think we can handle that. So I'm hopeful that this is going to work. We're going to be able to get people back to some sense of normalcy and open up this economy so it's firing again.
Congressman Kind, this is Olivia Herkin with the La Crosse Tribune. I'm wondering, is there something that maybe did not make it onto this new relief bill that you were hoping would make it on, or places you think the bill falls short?
You know, Olivia, I think we are touching most of the bases from the feedback, again, that we were getting from people back home. And there are other categories that we're going to have to come back to after this relief bill. I mean, I'd love to still see a major infrastructure investment bill in Congress this year. That includes broadband investment to close that digital divide once and for all. But that's going to be for another time, because it's hard to make the case that that's directly related to COVID. And that's kind of the parameters that we've been operating under. But as I said earlier, Congress should stay nimble and continue to listen to folks back home in case we miss things or overlook things that still need to be addressed. And hopefully we'll have that ability to do that.
Congressman Kind, yesterday yourself and Congressman Winstrup of Ohio, you'd sent a letter to Department of Health and Human Services regarding the COVID-19 information program and how it seems like they've just kind of bypassed rural radio stations and rural areas like myself and our station. Have you talked to other members as well about this to say, maybe we need to look at this a little closer?
Yeah. This is as you know well, this is the ongoing struggle we have in Washington. We have many more urban suburban representatives than urban reps. So it's my responsibility to keep reminding my colleagues and also the federal agencies, don't forget about rural services. And this is another example. The information we're trying to get out to inform people about the virus and the inoculations, the vaccines, need to also reach rural residents and rural radio stations, rural print. And that's why Brad and I teamed up in order to raise this level of awareness, and we're hoping to get a good response from it. Thanks, Brian. I think I got time for one more because we're right in the middle of a vote right now, so I'm gonna have to scoot across the street to the Capitol. If not, we can be available, so stay in touch. Let Sarah know if you have any follow-ups for us. Thanks, everyone. Enjoy the weather back home and stay safe.
You too. Thank you, sir.